There was a time in my life when I came dangerously close to death, yet miraculously, I managed to pull through. This experience felt like a second chance at life, sparking a desire within me to turn over a new leaf. However, amidst this newfound appreciation for life, I found myself struggling with the reality that I couldn't commit to caring for an elderly relative. My journey took a more complicated turn when, despite my efforts to save my husband by becoming his donor during his illness, he showed no gratitude. Instead, he coldly handed me the contact details of a divorce lawyer. This left me feeling both frustrated and anxious, yet, oddly, not surprised. Ever since he got back on his feet, he'd been distant, fueling my suspicions. And now it was me who was facing a health crisis. Diagnosed with stomach cancer, thankfully not at an advanced stage, I braced myself for the impending battle involving surgery and chemotherapy. Amidst this turmoil, my husband's decision to leave was a crushing blow, obliterating any love and trust I had for him instantly. It pained me to think of our daughter, Laura, growing up without her father. Yet, facing my own fight for life, I couldn't muster the energy to mend our fractured relationship. 2 months later, amidst my treatment, my estranged husband began reaching out aggressively, which I chose to ignore. However, he eventually confronted me in my hospital room, revealing unexpected news that left me reeling. Let me introduce myself properly. My name is Melissa Nicole, a 31-year-old who once juggled the roles of a housewife, mother, and employee with grace. Married to Stephen, just a year my senior, we've been blessed with our beloved daughter, Laura, now 6 years old. Following Laura's birth, I took a hiatus from my career, dreaming of dedicating myself fully to motherhood. Yet, financial pressures soon dictated a return to work. Fortuitously, I landed a position at an apparel company led by my sister-in-law, Janet. Despite the familial connection, I received no special treatment, but I found solace in the supportive environment and the camaraderie among working mothers. This job not only allowed me to contribute financially, but also offered a network of understanding and support, making the daunting balance of work, home, and childcare slightly more manageable. Every morning, I would start my day by preparing breakfast for my husband and making sure Laura, our daughter, had everything she needed. I'd pack my husband's lunch, send him off to work, drop Laura at daycare, and then head to my own job. After work, the routine continued. Picking up Laura, shopping for groceries, returning home to clean, bathe Laura, and cook dinner. By the time I finished Laura's meal, my husband would be home, and I'd quickly prepare his dinner too. After ensuring he was settled with his meal, I'd put Laura to bed. Despite the chows of my daily routine, my husband barely lent a hand with household chores or childcare. Even on days when Laura was ill and I was swamped with caring for her, he would still demand his breakfast without showing any concern. Whenever I asked him to contribute, like doing the grocery shopping because I had to work late, his complaints of being tired from work would end the conversation. Exhausted, I found myself handling everything alone. Our life took a dramatic turn when a company health check revealed concerning results for my husband. He initially resisted further testing, claiming he felt no pain and was perfectly fine, despite experiencing unusual symptoms like unexplained bruises and bleeding gums from simply brushing his teeth. Fearing the worst and considering Laura's future, I urged him to undergo a comprehensive examination. The diagnosis was leukemia, a word that struck fear but also carried a glimmer of hope, knowing that it wasn't a death sentence. Treatments like chemotherapy and bone marrow transplants have enabled many to go into remission and reintegrate into society. Determined to support my husband through his despair and the daunting journey of treatment, I found myself juggling work, household duties, childcare, and hospital visits. The stress and his hospitalization took a toll on him, leading to outbursts directed at me. Although I understood it was his frustration speaking, the relentless pace of my responsibilities left me utterly drained. It was during this tumultuous time that Janet, my sister-in-law, and the president of the company I worked for reached out with an offer. She suggested I move in with her, offering help with housework and caring for Laura. Her gesture was a beacon of support, providing a much-needed respite and a sense of solidarity in our shared struggle. Working alongside Janet, I witnessed firsthand her dedication and hands-on approach to sales. Unlike others, who might delegate extensively, she actively sought feedback directly from the field, fostering an open environment for staff to share their thoughts. This approach not only made her incredibly busy, but also deeply respected. Aware of her workload, I hesitated to accept her offer of help, voicing my concern about imposing on her already packed schedule. If you're overwhelmed, Laura will be the one who ends up suffering. Let me support Stephen in any way I can. You need to lean on those willing to help, Janet insisted, her words firm yet compassionate. Her encouragement brought me to tears, given the weight of concerns for Stephen, Laura, and my own well-being that I carried. Janet's offer came from a place of genuine support. She lived alone in her parents' large house, reluctant to sell it because of the memories it held. It's always felt too big for just me. I'm glad to share it with you and Laura, she said, welcoming us with open arms. Living with Janet proved to be a comforting experience. Her adeptness at managing household tasks lightened my load significantly, providing a semblance of stability during a tumultuous period. Hope surged when it was discovered that I was a compatible bone marrow donor for Stephen. Initially, Janet and I both underwent tests to determine our compatibility as donors. A daunting process, given the slim odds of finding a match outside the immediate family. The news of Janet's incompatibility was disheartening, but learning that I could donate to Stephen brought us immense joy. The process required me to be hospitalized for the bone marrow extraction, a period during which I had to temporarily step away from work and caregiving duties. This placed an additional load on Janet, yet she showed no signs of frustration. I'll do everything in my power to support you through this, so don't worry about anything and just focus on your recovery, she assured me. Bolstered by her unwavering support, I underwent the procedure, confident in the knowledge that Janet would take care of everything else. Following the surgery, Stephen needed to remain in a sterile environment to avoid any infections, while I was soon discharged, eager to return to some semblance of normalcy. Janet's support during this time was invaluable, not just in practical terms but also emotionally, as we navigated the complexities of treatment and recovery together. In the days following my procedure, Janet's generosity allowed me to take a few extra days off work to recuperate. The stem cell transplant we had hoped for Stephen began showing positive signs, and not long after, he was well enough to be moved to a general ward. Our daughter Laura and I visited him there, and his joy at seeing Laura after so long was unmistakable. A nurse shared with us that Stephen was recovering impressively, thanks to his youth and strength. She was optimistic about his return to work if his progress continued at this pace. A few months later, Stephen was discharged. He still needed to convalesce at home, but the burden of managing work, house chores, childcare, and caring for Stephen felt lighter with Janet living with us. Janet, ever the straightforward communicator, gently nudged Stephen towards taking up some household tasks as part of his rehabilitation. Stephen started to pitch in with chores, albeit reluctantly. However, as he was still on the mend, I often found myself assisting him, which eventually led to him backing off from even the simplest tasks, citing sluggishness or fatigue as reasons. There was a moment when, busy with dinner preparations, I asked Stephen to answer the doorbell. His response, a heavy sigh and a complaint about my being demanding, caught me off guard. Despite believing it wasn't too much to ask, I also understood I couldn't fully grasp the extent of his discomfort and chose to trust his judgment, even if it added strain on me. This period of exertion took its toll on my health. Eating became a challenge, and Janet expressed concern over my noticeable weight loss. By then, Stephen had mostly recuperated and resumed work, yet the domestic and childcare responsibilities remained just as demanding on me. Despite his recovery, Stephen started to spend more time outdoors, especially on his days off, seemingly oblivious to my deteriorating health and the ongoing need for support around the house. When I inquired about Stephen's whereabouts and companions, he responded tersely, emphasizing his right to a private life. This exchange further strained our relationship, leading to persistent stomach pains for me. Recognizing the severity of Stephen's recent health scare, I agreed with Janet's advice to undergo a comprehensive health check, especially to safeguard our daughter Laura's future. This decision led to a diagnosis I hadn't anticipated: stomach cancer. Although the disease was progressing slowly, the necessity for hospitalization and the daunting prospect of chemotherapy were immediate. As I grappled with this news, Laura sensed something was amiss. Stephen, however, was absent, leaving Janet to provide the comfort and stability Laura needed. Preparing for the hospital in silence, I was confronted by Stephen's oblivious inquiry upon his return, mistaking my preparations for signs of an impending trip. His indifference to my diagnosis, followed by his concern over household responsibilities during my hospitalization, left me stunned and deeply hurt. Stephen's reaction to my situation escalated unexpectedly to a request for divorce. His blunt admission that he no longer saw me as a woman, because I didn't wear makeup at home, coupled with his inability to cope with my illness, felt like a betrayal. This was a harsh blow, especially considering my past dedication during his illness and the lack of gratitude for the life-saving donation I made. His words and actions severed the remnants of our bond, leaving me to face my diagnosis and treatment with a heavy heart. Despite the turmoil, the reality of becoming a single parent to Laura weighed heavily on me, yet I found myself without the strength to mend what was broken between us. Stephen's changed demeanor since his recovery had already sown seeds of doubt, and his reaction to my illness only confirmed my suspicions. As we stood on the brink of separation, Stephen's satisfaction with the situation was evident, marking a painful end to our shared journey. In this moment, it became clear that our paths had diverged irreparably, turning us into strangers under the same roof, disconnected by unspoken grievances and a chasm of misunderstanding. Caught in a whirlwind of confusion and betrayal, I found myself facing an unexpected turn of events. As I was preparing to leave the house that had been my sanctuary, a stylishly dressed young woman with familiar features entered. At first, I didn't recognize her without her professional attire, but it soon dawned on me that she was the nurse from the hospital where Stephen had been treated. The realization hit harder when Stephen revealed that she had been more than just a nurse to him. Faced with Stephen's audacious claim of her devotion during his illness, a mix of shock and frustration washed over me. Being compared to her felt unjust, especially since caring is a nurse's duty. Stephen's demand for me to leave, asserting his claim over the family home, felt like a final blow. Yet, the house was technically Janet's, complicating matters further. The thought of losing my bond with Janet, who had been a pillar of support, was more painful than the prospect of divorcing Stephen. Despite the turmoil, I began packing, focusing on the essentials, and my impending hospital stay, eager to escape the chaos. Janet and Laura's return from shopping introduced a moment of normalcy until the reality of the situation unfolded. Announcing my decision to divorce Stephen, Janet's reaction mirrored my own shock. Yet, it was her confrontation with Stephen that marked a turning point. Defending me, Janet commanded Stephen to leave, a stance that underscored her unwavering support for me, despite the impending changes in our relationship. Stephen's departure, followed by his mistress's smug exit, left a bitter taste. Janet's apology and assurance of her continued support, however, offered a glimmer of hope. Despite the dissolution of my marriage, Janet's commitment to standing by me remained unshaken. Now, with Stephen presumably planning to start anew with the nurse, his financial prospects seemed uncertain, especially after his illness. But that concern was no longer mine to bear. As I faced hospitalization, the realization that, although my marriage had ended, Janet's support and kindness would continue, provided a comforting solace in the midst of upheaval. Contemplating my hospitalization, I considered leaving Laura with my parents, but the thought of transferring her kindergarten and adjusting to a new environment worried me. Janet, ever supportive, offered to care for Laura, recognizing the anxiety both separation and change would cause her. With Janet's stable work situation, I felt reassured and decided to entrust her with Laura's care. About a month into my hospital stay, calls from Stephen, now my ex-husband, began appearing on my phone. Choosing to ignore them, the calls persisted. Janet, who visited me, shared that Stephen had also been trying to contact her and even showed up at her place attempting to see me. Janet's advice to disregard his attempts was empowering, reminding me of my worth beyond his realization. Surprisingly, Stephen found his way to my hospital room. His knowledge of my location likely gleaned from following Janet. His unexpected visit was to share that his leukemia had returned, and he was in need of another bone marrow transplant. His plea for me to be a donor again struck me as audacious, especially after the emotional turmoil he'd caused. Confronted with his request, I was taken aback by the sheer convenience of his return at the onset of his illness. My response to his plea was cold but truthful. I reminded him of the nurse who had supposedly supported him more devotedly than I ever could. His regret became apparent when he admitted that, upon learning of his condition's recurrence, his girlfriend had left him, unwilling to care for someone sick. Stephen's reliance on me in his time of need, after everything that had transpired, was ironic. I firmly denied his request, highlighting the fact that he had abandoned me first. Faced with my refusal and the mention of consulting a lawyer for child support for Laura, Stephen was left speechless. Despite his illness, I was determined to ensure he fulfilled his responsibilities towards our daughter, underscoring the drastic shift in our relationship from partners to mere acquaintances, bound by legal and familial obligations. In the midst of a heated disagreement with Stephen, the tension in the room escalated until a doctor, noticing the uproar, intervened. The doctor managed to hold back Stephen as he made a grab for me, and subsequently, Stephen was taken into custody. Following an interrogation, he faced the consequences of his actions. A restraining order was put in place against him. The disturbance drew Janet back to my side, and upon learning what had transpired, she was visibly appalled by Stephen's egocentric behavior. Together with Janet's support, I decided to take legal action, seeking compensation from both Stephen and his mistress. While Stephen was hesitant, his mistress quickly agreed to settle, almost as though she was severing ties. Throughout this tumultuous period, Janet's unwavering support was a constant. She stood by me as I embarked on the slow journey to recovery, with my young daughter Laura providing her own form of innocent encouragement. The efforts paid off. My cancer was entirely removed, showing no signs of spreading. Meanwhile, Stephen, still in search of a donor, faced his own battles, his condition pressing him into a corner financially. His inability to fulfill child support obligations meant he also lost his visiting rights, leaving him to confront his illness isolated. Despite everything, my bond with Janet only grew stronger. After my discharge from the hospital, I contemplated moving out with Laura to avoid overburdening Janet. However, Janet insisted that I stay, urging me not to worry about such things and to focus on recovery first. Grateful for her generosity, I remained with her, strengthening our bond further. As time passed and I regained my financial footing, Laura and I moved into an apartment nearby. Yet, our connection with Janet remained unbroken, our lives intertwined as we continued to support each other. Our relationship evolved into a deep friendship, a silver lining in the aftermath of my ordeal with Stephen and my battle with illness. Janet's steadfast support through the darkest times has been a beacon of hope. As Laura grows, I hope she embodies Janet's strength, kindness, and fairness. Despite the hardships we've endured, the support and love we share are the foundations on which we build a hopeful future, cherishing our bond and looking forward to what lies ahead together.